Allison from Learning at the Primary Pond. I'm a literacy specialist, and in this video, I'm going to share how you can make better decisions as a teacher and why this matters so very much. Before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I would love for you to do that now, and then also hit the little bell so that you're notified anytime I post a brand new video about teaching. I chose this topic for this video because I actually did a podcast episode for my Reading Intervention Collaborative members that was super popular on this same thing. And in this video, I'm going to give you a lot of the highlights, but the full length episode is only available inside the Reading Intervention Collaborative, and I'll include a link in the caption for that. Okay, so let's talk decision making. There is research that shows that teachers make around 1,500 educational related decisions per day. That means you're making around 4 decisions every minute, which is wild, right? And honestly, you probably don't even notice these decisions. For example, like, your kids are writing and you notice that a student has misspelled a word. So you might think, okay, do I need to do anything about this? Or I just let them keep writing? Do I correct the misspelling? Do I ask the student to try again? Like, your brain is making these decisions whether you're aware of it or not. Or maybe like you've taught a lesson and the kids are doing some activity and it's not going very well. You have to make the decision of, okay, am I going to continue to let them work on this, or am I going to pull back and do a little more reteaching? This stuff, especially if you've been teaching for a while, just comes second nature, right? You're doing all of these things and you don't even realize it, which is so cool, but it's also a double-edged sword because you're making all these decisions, some of which you may not be aware of, but the decisions you make have a huge impact on student learning, right? Those 4 decisions a minute add up to whether kids master a concept or not, or whether they, move ahead in reading. We as teachers have so much power and influence over kids' learning. And as a result, we have to be really careful and intentional about the decisions that we make so that we can, of course, give our students the best outcomes, which is what we all want. There's also this concept of decision fatigue, which is basically the cognitive load on our brains that results from having to make so many decisions. Like, think about like popcorn in a bag. You eat a bunch and then there's none left. That's kind of how it is with making decisions and your brain's capacity to do that. Like, you get to a certain point and you really start feeling drained and it's harder to make decisions. I would actually love to know in the comments if you've ever felt that decision fatigue or felt overwhelmed by all the decisions you have to make as a teacher. Just let me know in the comments because I'm curious if that has ever affected you. I know for me, just, at the end of a school day, it's tiring, right? I feel tired. And I think that's true whether, I'm working with like kindergartners where it's very physically like, you're moving around a lot, or if you're working with older kids, it can still be very tiring. And I think a big part of that is decision fatigue. But now let's talk about how to make better decisions. And the good news here is that I'm not going to be giving you more stuff to do. Actually, the opposite in some cases. Making better decisions is not about doing more. It's about maybe making some tweaks or even sometimes doing less. My first strategy to help with decision making is to intentionally carve out more thinking time for yourself. Now, when I'm talking about thinking time, I don't mean the time between like when you ask a question and when you ask kids to answer, right? Like, that's thinking time for kids. This is not the same thing, but it's actually a little bit similar. So I don't know if you have ever had the experience of like, during the school day, it's go, go, go. I'm using every single possible moment to like make copies or fill out a kid's check-in, check-out chart or whatever else you're doing, right? And then maybe you're like noticing a problem or a student struggling with something, but during the school day, maybe even during the next day, you're just like, that it's a problem and you're aware of it, but you're not doing anything about it. You don't have any ideas to fix it. And then maybe it's the weekend, or maybe you're taking a shower or driving home and you're not listening to a podcast or anything that's kind of cluttering up your brain. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, this is what I should do with that kid, right? These problems and potential solutions sort of start to surface when your mind is not occupied. This can happen, for me, it happens when I'm walking. When I'm walking, I do kind of make some of my best decisions and get some of my best ideas. But the problem is with teachers, like at least in the United States, we're just not given enough time to like slow down and really think because there's just so much to do. And so again, this is not about adding something else for you to do, but maybe on your drive home, maybe you don't call a friend or listen to a podcast. Maybe you just let your brain have that white space. Or maybe you go for a walk after work. Maybe you kind of seed your brain and you're like, okay, this kid's really struggling with this. And it's not about going on that walk and being like, I gotta figure this out. I gotta figure this out. You're just kind of like presenting this problem, asking this question to your brain. And our brains love to solve problems, especially as teachers. We love to answer questions, right? Our brains want answers to that. So if you kind of just seed that in your mind and then go for a walk or you're driving, it may very well come to you. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that typically creative thinking usually happens during the second half of the day. So I definitely relate to this. In the morning, I'm like, get stuff done, like, just organized, logical. And then in the afternoon, I do sort of notice like, oh, okay, like I'm getting more creative ideas or I have solutions to problems that I was kind of stuck on. So, that's a generalization, but it may be that you have your best ideas first thing in the morning when you're laying in bed and you've just woken up, or another time of day. So just try to pay attention to when your best ideas come and even schedule your planning time around that time of day, right? If your best ideas come in the afternoon, then maybe you want to do like your copying and your more basic stuff earlier in the day so that you have a little bit of thinking time. Because the more space we have, the better decisions we make for our students. And this thinking time is something that I feel like no one talks about and teachers often aren't getting. But it's something that's really, really valuable. So even if it's only like 10 minutes a day or 20 minutes at the end of the week, just schedule yourself some thinking time where you're really not doing much of anything. I do think like if you're passing out papers in the classroom for the next week, that's kind of a mindless task. So you can kind of, see if your brain is open to doing some good thinking during those mindless tasks, but try getting it on the calendar or try just paying attention to giving yourself more thinking time because that can really make a big impact on your decision making. Strategy number 2 is make sure that you have the right data to inform your decisions. Now, as teachers, we have a lot of interaction with our students typically, and so we might feel like, oh yeah, we know what they're doing well with, we know what they're not doing so well with, but I can't tell you how many times, especially, I would say less so as a reading specialist, but more so as a classroom teacher because there's just so much going on. I felt like, oh yeah, we're good here, and then I gave an assessment, and the data really surprised me. And of course, that might seem obvious, like use data to inform your decision making, but sometimes we don't have the right kind of data. So for example, maybe your school has a fluency screener, right? And you have, of course, like every grade level in the school, but your second graders do like a timed reading. And you have one student who seems to be doing okay with that. But then what you don't realize is like to get them to the next level, they really need to improve and solidify their phonics knowledge. That's kind of like a hidden thing, right? And you don't know what phonics patterns, what skills they know and they don't know yet. So you're using the data that your school provides, or rather that the data that your school requires you to gather, but there's some underlying stuff going on that you're not aware of. That's actually something that we really dig into in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, especially this is important for all teachers, right? Classroom teachers and beyond, but especially for reading specialists and teachers like me, where we are really trying to figure out, okay, why is a kid struggling with reading? What are like these below the iceberg, that iceberg metaphor with like all of this below the iceberg? We're trying to find what is down here, and the modules in the RIC really help you understand how to dig this out. But anyway, I digress. All of this coming back to the idea that we need to make sure that we have the right data to make the best decisions. So ask yourself, what do I want to find out about this child? Or what might be kind of like lurking below the surface that I don't have information on? And then choose assessments that way. Again, it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, okay, well, my school says we are doing like a weekly reading test and we're doing the fluency screener 3 times a year or however many times. And again, that stuff can be really helpful, but sometimes it just doesn't provide like the detailed assessment of like, does a child get these skills or not? So really be, just use critical thinking when you're looking at data and try to fill in the gaps where they might be. Another thing that can really be helpful is to get data about your own instruction. So first we were talking about data for kids, but it's so revealing when you watch yourself teaching a lesson, or even if video is intimidating, like audio record yourself, just put the audio recorder thing on your phone, listen to your own talking. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, oh my gosh, I talk too much. I need to just reel it back and let the kids do more talking. So that's something that you can use just as a tool to self-improve, or if you feel like your kids really are struggling in a subject area or a certain time of day, audio record that lesson and see what it sounds like. You might really notice some things about your teaching that can be enlightening. You can also time track your lessons. Is especially helpful if like you're a classroom teacher. I think it's helpful for anybody, but if you're a classroom teacher and you have these big blocks of time that you're filling with different subjects, like really ask yourself, okay, how long is my mini lesson actually taking? How long does it actually take for kids to, transition from one activity to another? Because sometimes we have a schedule down on paper, but in reality, something is actually happening that's very different. And so we're wondering why we keep running out of time, but the reality is that all we needed to do was time track and see, when are we actually moving between these things? How long am I spending on the lesson? That can be really revealing too. And okay, so we talked about like academic assessments and digging deeper. We talked about digging deep into your lessons and what's actually happening in your teaching, what's going on in your classroom. And then the last strategy has to do more with behavior. We tend to have like assessments and tracking for academic stuff, but you can and should also do this for behavior. Because if a child is having a behavior issue, you want to know like what happened right before it, what happened right after. Are they getting some kind of attention that they really enjoy? Is it that, right before lunch, this is when this behavior happens? So we have to get kind of data driven with that too, and that can also help us make better decisions. My next strategy is to completely unplug from work. If you're like many teachers, then your kids, the school day, what you have to do is on your mind a lot. But there is this concept called psychological detachment from work, meaning that not only are you not physically working in the building or you're not grading papers at home or whatever, but you're actually not thinking about work either for, more than like 5 minutes at a time, right? Like a chunk of mental rest from work. And what the research shows us is that when people fully detach, it decreases the chances that they will burn out. Right? Because even if you come in right at your contract time and you leave right at your contract time, if you're still thinking about work on the weekends, during the evenings, of course you're going to burn out, right? And so, that's not being fully detached. So decide ahead of time, maybe even going into the new school year, if you're about to start a new school year, decide ahead of time, like, hey, I'm going to psychologically detach from work at 4:30 or whatever the appropriate time is for you. And then you need to also give your body and your brain some kind of signal like, hey, we are transitioning. For me, it's working out. For you, it could be making dinner, playing with your kids, whatever, right? We want to set up a routine for ourselves so that our mind knows like, hey, we are checking out. Some people even do something where they're like, they have like an end of the day routine where they like close their planner or whatever else and they're like all done, or they literally say something to themselves to signal like, okay, we are psychologically detaching from work, because that can be so valuable. And the thing is like you will make better decisions when you're not constantly thinking about work. We might think like, oh yeah, I'm going to think about this really hard and long and I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to spend all this time in the classroom, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually doing better as a teacher. It could mean that you're just bombarding your brain. Your brain's not getting a break, so you're actually making worse decisions. So be intentional about psychologically detaching from work, and that can really help with your decision making, but also help you avoid burnout. My last recommendation for making better decisions as a teacher is to seek out professional learning that's really relevant to you. Now, sometimes your school might choose a topic, a book, a speaker, whatever else. And sometimes it's helpful, and honestly, sometimes it's not, right? It's not necessarily what you personally need to focus on. So that is something that we as teachers need to seek out ourselves sometimes. Doesn't mean that a school can't pay for it, but that might be something that we need to go and look for. And continuing to learn is good for so many reasons, right? It's good because our brains love new stuff. And so to keep yourself engaged, excited about teaching, it's really good to give them some new stuff. But it's also very good because when you have the most up-to-date information, that's when you make the best decisions. Take the science of reading, for example. Some people say like, oh yeah, I'm using the science of reading, check, I'm done. But that's actually not how it works. The science of reading is a growing body of knowledge, and there's new advancements, new research all the time. So that's another reason why we need to stay up to date so we can make the best decisions, because sometimes things change. That's normal. It's part of being a human, right? We have more information, so we act differently. I talked earlier about the Reading Intervention Collaborative. I mentioned that podcast that I have. Every single month, I record a brand new 30-minute episode for my members, which is so easy because you can like listen in the car. And you also get a transcript if you prefer to read, and then you get a certificate for that, for your PD hours. There's also over 17 hours worth of trainings inside the membership, so there's plenty to learn and lots of material to just proceed at your own pace through and grow. And when there's new research updates, I add those. I make a podcast episode about it. I add a new video. So being a member of the Reading Intervention Collaborative is a really great way to stay up to date on the research. We have reading specialists in there. We have classroom teachers. We have special education teachers. We have all kinds of educators in the RIC. So if that's something that interests you, definitely check out the caption of this video. All right, that's all I got for you. There are a couple more strategies in the RIC podcast, but again, you can look at the caption and check that out. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we will wrap up. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful. It would mean so much to me if you would hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video.